E.J. Johnson, the Internet, and the Art of Living Your Truth. In today's social media world, it doesn't take much for people to form strong opinions about someone else's life. One clip, one interview, or one comment can turn into a full-blown debate across YouTube, Twitter, and blogs. Recently, that's exactly what happened with E.J. Johnson. E.J. stirred conversation online after speaking openly about his life, his upbringing, and how he views the world. Some people felt inspired, others felt offended, and a whole lot of YouTube commentators suddenly had a lot to say. But here's the real question: are people judging E.J. Johnson without fully understanding the life he lived? Let's talk about it. E.J. Johnson, a life that looks different. To understand the reaction, you first have to understand where E.J. Johnson comes from. E.J. is the son of basketball legend Magic Johnson, one of the most famous athletes in American history. His father built an empire through basketball, business, and entertainment. Because of that, E.J. grew up in a world that most people never experience. He had access to wealth, elite schools, luxury travel, and connections that many people spend their whole lives trying to reach. That doesn't mean his life was perfect, but it does mean his starting point was very different from the average person. And that difference is exactly where the conversation started. When E.J. speaks about life, relationships, success, or even personal struggles, he's speaking from a perspective shaped by privilege, fame, and a unique upbringing. For some viewers, that perspective felt out of touch. For others, it felt honest. The internet had opinions, lots of them. Once clips from E.J.'s interview started circulating online, YouTube commentary channels quickly jumped in. Suddenly, everyone had something to say. Some critics argued that E.J. sounded dismissive about struggles that everyday people face. Others accused him of not understanding the realities of people who grew up with fewer resources. But here's the thing about the internet: context rarely survives the comment section. Many people reacting to the clip were responding emotionally rather than trying to understand the bigger picture. When someone speaks confidently about their own life, it can sometimes trigger strong reactions, especially if that life looks very different from yours. That's exactly what happened here. Why some people felt triggered. A lot of the criticism wasn't necessarily about E.J. personally. It was about what he represents. E.J. Johnson represents wealth, privilege, celebrity culture, a life most people will never live. When someone from that world speaks about life lessons, success, or personal choices, it can make people feel like their own struggles are being overlooked. But that doesn't necessarily mean E.J. was wrong. It just means he was speaking from his reality. And reality isn't the same for everyone. Growing up E.J. Johnson. Another piece of the conversation that people sometimes forget is that E.J. Johnson also had his own challenges growing up. Coming out publicly as a gay man in a high-profile sports family was not a simple situation. The world watched him figure out his identity in real time. While some people expected conflict within his family, his parents, especially Magic Johnson, ultimately showed strong public support for him. That kind of support is something many LGBTQ people never receive. Because of that, E.J.'s experience of being gay in America also looks different from many others. His journey was shaped by acceptance, wealth, and visibility. For some people, that difference makes them feel like he can't speak on certain struggles. But again, everyone's story is different. Being honest about your life. One thing E.J. Johnson has never done is pretend to be someone else. From his fashion choices to his personality, he has always been unapologetically himself. Whether people love it or hate it, E.J. lives his life openly. That's something many public figures struggle to do. And in a culture where celebrities constantly try to appear relatable, E.J. has never really tried to hide the reality of his upbringing. He knows he grew up rich. He knows he lived differently. And instead of pretending otherwise, he simply owns it. Why I always gave E.J. grace. Personally, I've always been a fan of E.J. Johnson. Not because I agree with everything he says, but because I understand where he's coming from. If someone grows up in a completely different environment than the average person, of course their perspective will be different. Why wouldn't it be? The internet sometimes expects celebrities to speak like everyday people, but the truth is they're not living everyday lives. E.J. Johnson is speaking from the world he knows. And that's okay. You don't have to agree with him to understand that his experience shaped his opinions. The real lesson from this situation isn't about E.J. Johnson being right or wrong. It's about perspective. Everyone views life through the lens of their own experiences. Someone who grew up struggling financially will see the world differently than someone who grew up wealthy. Someone who grew up in a small town will see the world differently than someone raised in Hollywood circles. Neither perspective is automatically wrong. They're just different. Why the internet loves a debate. Social media thrives on controversy. When someone like E.J. Johnson says something that doesn't match the internet's expectations, the reaction becomes entertainment. People argue. YouTube channels react. Comment sections explode. But sometimes the conversation forgets something important. People are allowed to live their lives the way they choose. E.J. Johnson didn't trick anyone. He simply spoke from his truth. And that truth just happens to look very different from the average person's story. Final thoughts. At the end of the day, E.J. Johnson's life is his own. Some people will relate to him. Some people won't. Some viewers will agree with what he said. Others will criticize it. That's the nature of public conversations in the internet age. But if there's one thing to remember, it's this: not everyone's story starts in the same place. E.J. Johnson grew up in a world that most people can only imagine. That doesn't mean his experiences aren't real, it just means they're unique. And whether people agree with him or not, he's still living his life on his own terms. And honestly, that's something a lot of people are still trying to learn how to do.